Japan in the 1850s was a perfectly functional feudal society. You had your samurai, your shogun, and a god emperor who mostly just wrote poetry. For 200 years, they'd maintained a self-imposed national do not disturb sign called sakoku, and it was working great until July 8, 1853. That's when American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Edo Bay with his black ships. He wasn't there to admire the cherry blossoms, he was there to deliver a letter from the president which, paraphrased, said, "Trade with us or we will blow you to bits." The Japanese called it gunboat diplomacy. A more accurate term might be a protection racket on an international scale. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had run Japan for centuries, proceeded to have a system-wide panic attack. They were a military government that hadn't fought a real war in over 200 years. Their best strategists were experts in flower arranging. Faced with Perry's steam-powered warships, they did what any unprepared bureaucracy does. They signed a deeply humiliating treaty. The Treaty of Kanagawa opened up ports and granted the U.S. special privileges, which was followed by more unequal treaties with other Western powers. It was the international equivalent of giving away your lunch money every day to avoid getting shoved into a locker. A lot of powerful people, especially younger samurai in the outer domains, were not pleased. So, a group of angry, ambitious samurai from domains like Satsuma and Choshu came up with a brilliant slogan: Son Jirei, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. It was a fantastic marketing pitch that blamed the shogun for being weak and the foreigners for being, well, foreign. They rallied support, fought a brief but decisive civil war called the Boshin War, and in 1868, they restored the 15-year-old Emperor Meiji to power. Of course, the moment they got into office, they conveniently forgot about the expel the barbarians part. It turns out fighting steamships with swords is a terrible long-term strategy. Their new plan was far more radical. If you can't beat them, copy them so fast it gives everyone whiplash. The new Meiji government's first big initiative was the Iwakura Mission in 1871. They sent nearly half their government on a 2-year tour of the United States and Europe. This wasn't a vacation. It was a national intelligence gathering operation disguised as a field trip. They visited factories, parliaments, and shipyards with notebooks out, creating a shopping list for a modern nation. We'll take the British Navy, thank you. Oh, the Prussian Army looks nice and efficient. We'll have one of those. And America's public education system? Perfect for creating loyal, literate factory workers. The French legal code seems complicated enough to be official. They were Frankensteining a country together with the best parts of the West. There was one tiny, inconvenient problem with this plan to create a modern, centralized state: the samurai. The very warrior class that led the Restoration was now an expensive, obsolete feudal relic. For centuries, their entire identity was based on being the only ones with swords and a government-paid stipend. The Meiji government, run by ex-samurai, first converted their rice stipends into pathetic government bonds and then, in 1876, passed the High Tray Edict. No more swords in public. This was like telling every knight in Europe they now had to be accountants and couldn't carry their most important possession. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with a class of people whose entire profession was honorable violence. All this frustration boiled over in the 1877 Satsuma Rebellion, led by the man who was perhaps the most famous of the Restoration heroes, Saige Takamori. He was a walking contradiction, a traditionalist who helped launch a revolution he ultimately couldn't stomach. He led an army of furious, unemployed samurai against a brand new imperial Japanese army. It was a battle of tradition versus modernity. Saig's samurai, with their swords and old muskets, charged against a conscript army of peasants armed with modern rifles and artillery, trained by Western advisors. Spoiler alert, it did not end well for the samurai. Saig became a tragic folk hero, the ultimate symbol of a world that was vanishing, whether he liked it or not. With the samurai problem settled, Japan went into industrial overdrive. The government's new motto was Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the military. They built railways, telegraph lines, and model factories like the Tomioka silk mill at a dizzying pace. To fund it all, they implemented a brutal land tax that squeezed farmers dry, forcing many into tenancy or city factories. And who benefited? The government sold many of these new industries at bargain prices to well-connected families. This is how the giant corporate conglomerates called the Zaibatsu, Mitsui, Sumitomo, got their start. It was a masterclass in using government power to create a new capitalist oligarchy. Very modern indeed. The cultural change was just as jarring. The government promoted Bunmei Kaika, or civilization and enlightenment. This essentially meant all Western stuff was now cool. Suddenly, Tokyo's elite were wearing top hats and corsets, learning to ballroom dance at a special hall called the Rokumei-kan, and eating beef, something previously taboo. It was a deeply awkward phase. Imagine your entire society deciding overnight that everything it has ever done is embarrassing, and now everyone must act like a Victorian Englishman. But beneath it all was the real slogan, Wakan Yosai, Japanese spirit, Western technology. They were adopting the tools of the West, but the goal was always to preserve a unique Japanese essence, all in service of the emperor and the nation. It was a very selective copy-paste job. All this frantic modernization wasn't just about avoiding colonization, it was about joining the colonizers' club. The new Prussian-trained army and British-trained navy were itching for a test drive. They got one in 1894 with the First Sino-Japanese War. Japan, the tiny island nation, absolutely demolished China, the ancient regional superpower. It was a shock to the world. Then, in 1905, they took on and defeated Russia, a major European power. This was an even bigger shock. No one in the West thought an Asian nation could do that. Japan had successfully used Western methods not just to defend itself, but to build its own empire, starting with Taiwan and Korea. They learned the lesson of gunboat diplomacy a little too well. So, the Meiji Restoration was a staggering success, if your only metric for success is, did we get colonized? They built a modern industrial state, a world-class military, and a global empire in less than 50 years. But the speed came at a cost. Society was ripped from its foundations, creating immense social strain. The new government was highly authoritarian, centered on a deified emperor and a powerful military that answered only to him. They traded feudalism not for liberal democracy, but for a hyper-nationalist, militaristic state. They avoided being a target of Western imperialism by becoming an imperial power themselves, setting the stage for the catastrophic events of the 20th century. It's a classic case of solving one problem by creating a much, much bigger one for the next generation to deal with. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!